The blade was already at her throat when Mira Sato started laughing. Not a nervous laugh. Not the broken laugh of someone about to die. A real one, low and warm, like she just heard the punchline to a joke. Only she understood. The Varenthi warrior holding the blade. 9 feet of corded gray muscle. Twin curved horns catching the violet light of the throne hall. Hesitated. In 400 years, no one had laughed at a Vessona blade. The women of Vessona Prime didn't need to threaten. They only needed to show the edge, and entire delegations from a dozen star systems fell silent, because everyone in the coalition knew what those blades had done to the last 3 species, foolish enough to test them. Something amuses you, human. The warrior's voice was translated through the collar around Mira's neck, flattened into something almost gentle, which made it worse. Yeah, Mira said. You're shaking. The blade wasn't shaking, but the hand holding it was. A tremor so small most translators wouldn't have caught it, buried in muscle memory the warrior had spent a lifetime perfecting. Mira had spent 6 years reading tremors like that in ICU wards back on Earth, in the half-second before a patient's heart gave out, in the grip of a surgeon on hour 11 of a procedure that was slipping away from them. She knew fear when she saw it wearing armor. I do not fear you, the warrior said. I didn't say you feared me, Mira answered. I said you're shaking. Not the same thing. Somewhere behind the throne, Matriarch Ilkesh Vor rose from her seat of black stone, and for the first time in 4 centuries, an entire hall of Vessona warriors. Women who had never lost a war, never lost a duel, never once been made to kneel, went utterly silent. None of this had begun that way. 9 days earlier, the human diplomatic shuttle, Common Ground, had dropped out of slip space above Vessona Prime with exactly 1 human aboard and a security detail nervous enough to double-check their restraints twice. Vessona Prime was the planet every species in the Outer Coalition feared and no one visited by choice. It was ruled, completely, absolutely, by its women, the Vessona having long ago decided that their males, gentle and academic by nature, had no place in matters of war or diplomacy. The women trained from birth in a martial tradition so total that by adulthood, a Vessona warrior could disarm a coalition peacekeeping squad with her bare hands, and had, on 3 separate occasions, done exactly that to prove a point. 3 other species had tried diplomacy with Vessona Prime. The Threll had sent a fleet, thinking strength would earn respect. The fleet returned home in pieces, and the survivors spoke of women who moved like they'd already seen the fight end before it began. The Oseran Concord had sent scholars, hoping intellect would open doors. The scholars were sent home within a week, their proposals shredded, literally, by warriors who found their assumptions insulting. The Karnathi Dominion had sent nothing at all, having heard enough stories to know better. Earth sent Mira Sato, a trauma nurse, unarmed, alone. You understand this is either very brave or very stupid, said Ambassador Reyes over the comm, 12 hours before planetfall. I understand, I'm the only one who volunteered. Mira said, checking the seal on her medical case one more time. That probably tells you something. What it told Reyes was that Mira Sato had spent the last 2 years running trauma triage in the Belt colonies during the mining strike, the kind of work that left most people either broken or terrifyingly calm. Mira had come out the other side calm. Unshakable, some said, though her sister would have told you that wasn't quite right. That Mira had just learned, the hard way, exactly which things were worth being shaken by, and a hostile alien planet wasn't one of them. The shuttle touched down on a landing pad carved from black volcanic stone, and Mira stepped out into air that smelled like ozone and iron, facing a welcoming party of 6 armored women who did not welcome her. You are smaller than the reports suggested, said the one at the center, Matriarch Ilkesh Vor herself, though Mira wouldn't learn her name for another hour. I get that a lot, Mira said. Your species sent no soldiers, no scholars of note, a healer. Ilkesh's tone made the words sound like an insult. Do you understand what that tells us about how little you value this negotiation? Mira looked past her, at the 6 warriors flanking the matriarch, at the way each one's eyes tracked, not Mira's hands, but her stance. The automatic threat assessment of women who had never once been wrong about who was dangerous. It tells you we sent the person best equipped to understand what you actually need, Mira said. I'm just not sure you know what that is yet. The silence that followed lasted 11 full seconds. No one had spoken to a matriarch that way in living memory. But that wasn't even the strangest part of that first day. Vessona law required all off-world emissaries to prove themselves in the trial circle before any treaty could be discussed. A ritual combat, not to the death, but close enough that the distinction rarely mattered to the losers. The Threll fleet commander had lasted 4 seconds. The Oseran scholar envoy hadn't even lasted that long. She'd frozen the moment the warrior moved. Mira Sato requested to skip the trial circle entirely. The hall erupted in something between laughter and outrage. Ilkesh Vor silenced it with a raised hand. Explain yourself, the matriarch said, before I have you removed from this planet in a coffin. You test every emissary through combat because you're trying to answer one question, Mira said. Standing very still in the center of a hall built to make visitors feel small. Not whether they can fight. You already know almost none of them can. You're testing whether they'll lie about it, whether they'll posture and pretend and waste your time pretending to be something they're not. Ilkesh's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. I'm not going to lie to you, Mira continued. I would lose that fight in about 2 seconds, and we would both know it, and nothing would have been proven, except that I'm bad at something I never claimed to be good at. So let me prove something else instead. Give me your worst wound, something your healers can't fix. If I can't help, you send me home, and you'll never see another human on this planet again. If I can, you owe me one honest conversation, warrior to warrior, not diplomat to matriarch, just the truth. No one had ever refused the trial circle. No one had ever offered something in its place. Ilkesh Vor should have said no. Every instinct 400 years of unbroken tradition had built into her screamed that this was a trick, a human trying to wriggle out of the one test that mattered. Instead, she found herself thinking of her second daughter, lying in the healer's quarter 3 floors below, and said, "Follow me." The girl on the medical slab was maybe 17 in human years, and dying slowly, which was worse than dying fast. 6 months earlier, Kessa Vor had taken a training wound from a ceremonial blade coated in a paralytic toxin, an old Vessona tradition, meant to test discipline under pain. That had gone catastrophically wrong when the toxin reacted with something in her blood no one had a name for. The wound wouldn't close. The paralysis had crept from her leg to her spine. Vessona medicine, built entirely around trauma and combat injury, had no framework for what was happening to her, because Vessona warriors did not get sick. They got wounded, and wounds healed, or they didn't. The Vessona healers hadn't told the matriarch the truth. They'd told her Kessa was recovering, slowly. In private, they'd already begun preparing her for a death. None of them knew how to explain, because on Vessona Prime, admitting a healer's failure was its own kind of shame. Mira looked at the wound for 4 seconds before her whole posture changed. The calm, settling deeper, the way a soldier's does the instant training takes over from thought. This isn't a combat wound anymore, Mira said quietly. This is sepsis, systemic. Somebody's been treating the entrance point and ignoring what's happening underneath it for weeks. Impossible, snapped the head healer, a broad-shouldered woman named Kessa. We have followed every protocol for a wound, not for this. Mira was already pulling instruments from her case, hands moving with a speed and precision that made every warrior in the room go still. Your daughter isn't dying from the cut, matriarch. She's dying Because your medicine was built for warriors who bleed and heal, or bleed and die, fast, clean, in a day. It was never built for someone whose body is fighting itself slowly, over months. You don't have doctors who treat sickness. You only have healers who treat wounds. The matriarch's mask cracked, just slightly. And you can treat this. I've spent 6 years treating exactly this. Not the cause. I don't know your biology well enough yet for that, but I can buy her time. Weeks, maybe months, while your healers and I figure out the rest together. Mira looked up, meeting Ilkesh's eyes for the first time as an equal instead of a suspect. That's not a promise I'm overpowered enough to guarantee. That's a promise that I will not stop trying until either she's well or I have nothing left to try. Nobody in that room, not the healers, not the guards, not the matriarch herself, had expected the human's greatest weapon to be a needle and 40 hours without sleep, 6 days. That was how long Mira Sato stayed awake in shifts, sleeping in 90-minute fragments on a cot, dragged into Kessa's chamber, running diagnostics with equipment, jury-rigged between human and Vessona tech, arguing with Kessa, the head healer, in increasingly fluent Vessona, about antibody response and immune cascade, until the two of them, against every expectation, became something like colleagues. On the third day, Kessa Vor opened her eyes and spoke her mother's name for the first time in a month. On the fourth day, Mira collapsed from exhaustion in the hallway. And it was Kessa, proud, furious, skeptical Kessa, who caught her before she hit the floor and carried her, wordlessly, to a real bed. On the fifth day, the fever broke, and on the sixth day, Matriarch Ilkesh Vor walked into the healer's quarter to find her daughter sitting upright, weak but alive, laughing quietly at something the exhausted human girl beside her bed had said. And the matriarch understood, with a clarity that shook her more than any battlefield ever had, that she had almost lost her daughter to 400 years of pride disguised as tradition. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Word of the healing spread through the palace faster than any battle report. And with it came a different kind of danger, because the Vessona were not a people who forgave easily the notion that they might need anyone. A faction within the warrior caste, led by a commander named Thria Cole, saw the matriarch's gratitude toward the human as weakness, not medical debt. Political vulnerability. Thria had spent a decade positioning herself as Ilkesh's successor, and a matriarch who owed her daughter's life to an outsider, an unarmed, physically unremarkable outsider, was, in Thria's eyes, no longer fit to rule. Thria didn't move against Mira in the open. That would have been too obvious, too traceable back to her. Instead, she invoked the one law even the matriarch couldn't override without triggering a full succession crisis. The trial circle, retroactively demanded, on the grounds that no off-world emissary had ever been formally granted diplomatic status without it. A technicality, a loophole, a death sentence dressed as procedure. That was how Mira Sato ended up standing in the center of the throne hall 9 days after landing, with Thria Cole's champion holding a blade to her throat, and Mira laughing instead of screaming, because she had already noticed, while every other person in that room was watching the blade, that the champion's hand was shaking. "You're afraid of what happens if you kill me," Mira said, still not moving, the edge of the blade a cold line against her skin. "Not of me, of what it means. Kessa Vor is alive because of a healer your matriarch publicly credited with saving her line's future. Kill that healer on a technicality invoked by Thria Cole's faction, and every warrior in this hall will know exactly what this was. Not law. Fear wearing law's face. Silence her." Thria Cole snapped from the edge of the hall, and something in her voice had gone thin and desperate in a way it hadn't been a moment before. But the champion didn't move the blade. "You are not begging for your life," the warrior said slowly, studying Mira's face like she was seeing something for the first time. "No," Mira said. "I already told your matriarch. I'm not here to lie, and I'm not here to posture. I'm telling you the truth, warrior to warrior, the way I promised her I would. If you kill me for a wound I gave freely and a life I saved without asking for anything back, that's not justice. That's Thria Cole using your blade to solve her problem. And you'll carry that for the rest of your life, whether or not your law technically permits it. The champion's grip loosened, not from weakness. From understanding, Ilkesh Vor rose from her throne, and this time when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the hall. Lower the blade. The champion did, instantly, without hesitation, the automatic obedience of a lifetime's training. And in the sudden quiet, Threa Cole realized her miscalculation a half-second too late. She had wagered that the champion's loyalty to law would outweigh the room's loyalty to truth. She had been wrong. Commander Threa Cole, Ilkesh said, each word deliberate as a blade finding its mark. You invoked ancient law to hide a modern fear. You are not afraid this human is weak. You are afraid she proved that strength alone was never enough to keep this world safe, and that terrifies you more than any invading fleet ever could. Threa Cole said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Mira Sato didn't stay on Vessona Prime forever. Earth needed her back eventually, and Kessa Vor, fully recovered 6 months later, would insist on being the one to walk her to the shuttle. But the treaty that was signed that week wasn't the trade agreement Ambassador Reyes had expected. It was something the coalition had never seen before. The first alliance in Vessona history, built not on a species proving it could match Vessona's strength, but on one human proving that courage and compassion were not the same as weakness, and that sometimes the bravest thing in the room isn't the blade. Years later, new emissaries arriving at Vessona Prime would still hear the story. How the humans, who had no warriors to send, had sent a healer instead, and how she had earned something no army ever had, not the Vessona's fear, but their trust. And on quiet nights, when Matriarch Ilkesh Vor watched her daughter train in the courtyard below, healthy and whole, and laughing the way she hadn't in a year, she would remember the words the human girl had said to her that very first day, standing small and unarmed in a hall built to break lesser souls. I'm just not sure you know what you actually need yet. She had needed a healer. She just hadn't known yet that healers could be the bravest warriors of all.